Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rekstad and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. Today's episode is sponsored by Analogic, a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 customer engagement solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality offshore Dynamics CRM programming services. Analogic's innovative solutions portfolio includes Maplytics, a premier map visualization, routing, and geoanalytics app for Dynamics 365 customer engagement, InnoLink that offers a seamless integration between QuickBooks and Dynamics 365 customer engagement, and other productivity apps like User Adoption Monitor, Click to Clone, and Click to Export. We thank Analogic for their sponsorship of today's show. So for this episode, I would like to start out by thanking the people who have not given me a hard time about how each of our episodes starts out. We will move on to something, I don't know, a little more straightforward. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think it's important to call out that that was not a passive-aggressive way for me to get back at Britta. She was not giving me a hard time. It was a number of people coming out of CRM UG Summit, which recently happened. And okay, point taken, everybody. Well, we can change. We can take that feedback. Now get out there and submit some questions through the website rather than just giving a hard time. So as far as topic for this episode, we talked a little bit about Relevance Search. Mm-hmm. Still a newer feature of the platform, and one where some people have seen it, some people have played with it. It's a little bit different from kind of the traditional category search of global search that was introduced. So does that sound good?
Yeah, very exciting.
Cool. So, I mean, to start things out, I mean, just from an end user perspective, I think it's important to talk about how people use it, where they use it, how they get to it, just so we have that common foundation for anybody listening who maybe doesn't even know that much. Mm-hmm. So, in Dynamics, in the navigation menu, there's the little search icon that brings up a simple search window for you to search across a bunch of entities inside of Dynamics instead of just opening up a view and going into one. So with Dynamics, it was either 2015 or 2016 that Relevance Search was introduced. That same little search menu can, instead of searching just within the Dynamics platform, it can actually use an Azure search to be able to look at your various records. So as a user, you don't have to know anything about Azure, you don't have to log in somewhere else, but instead of having kind of multiple columns of records come back to you, a different column for each record type, instead what you have is a more Bing-like or Google-like search result, a single set with everything kind of commingled together, and then you filter it down from there.
Nice.
Yeah. And the basic concept here is, how do you make search the most usable for the most people? Mm-hmm. And getting global search, which has been one of those long time asks from people.
Oh, yeah.
And there have been a lot of ISV solutions over the years to be able to address that. And Microsoft came back with category search originally, but it's limited to only up to 10 entities that you can search across. That's all the more you could have in there. And with Relevance Search, you're able to expand that. You're not just limited to those 10, and you can do further filtering of the records after you have your original results. So filtering by the last date it was modified, or who the owner is, or a number of different fields in that way.
Nice. I like how search is expanding, because that was something that was so hard when you're teaching a user. Let's say you have a new hire and you're bringing them into an existing CRM system. Mm-hmm. I found it takes way more time than I always think it will just to teach somebody where to go for something.
Yeah.
Which record has the phone number on it, which record has an email address. And you'd think, when you're in CRM all the time, you just naturally go to the right entity. But getting users to grasp the multiple entities and where to look for things and how things are related was always such a struggle. And so just getting global search was such a big win, because then at least they could say, just go type their name in this bar, and then hopefully things start to resonate and they see something that looks familiar.
Yeah.
But I love that searching is getting more and more relevant to the user and a little more natural. It's things that they already understand from their life outside of work.
Definitely. And there are still a couple of things that you end up having to teach people or train people on because global search, it's the same box that can do two different types of search, and each user can choose which one they want to use. So if you have two people next to each other, one of them has it set for relevance search, the other has it set for category search, they both see a different experience. So there is some potential for training there, and also there are some situations where one can be a little bit better than the other depending on how you're using it. Mm-hmm. So there's not a silver bullet, but this is definitely one where it is more similar to traditional web searches that people have known how to do for years now.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah.
So how much work is it for me as an admin to go set it up?
So fortunately, it's not terrible, actually.
So optimistic.
Well, it is one of those things, you start hearing things like, well, it uses Azure. Well, do I have to go set up an Azure subscription to be able to do this and those types of things? And fortunately, the Dynamics platform does all of that behind the scenes work for you. So it is checking a few boxes within the platform to do that. You do have to be a system administrator in order to enable the search across your entire organization. Because when you do this, just a simple thing you need to be aware of is that because it's going out to Azure, it's going out of the Dynamics platform, which means your data, which could be sensitive data, is going into another place. Now, it is rather secure. Microsoft does a good job with that, but you need to be aware of the fact that it is going outside of the Dynamics platform at that point. Mm-hmm. That's why you have to have an administrator do that setup.
Okay. Are you able to control what data is going outside of your platform?
So absolutely you can. And that's the part where you don't have to necessarily be an administrator. You do have to be at least a system customizer to be able to choose which fields. And we'll get into some of the details of that in a little bit here. But you do have some of that control. But there's not a way for an administrator to forcibly block a configurator from adding in fields that they shouldn't. So there needs to be some awareness, some care that's taken. And just by the nature of how these are set up, it would be possible for someone configuring the system to not realize that by adding some additional fields in, say, to a quick find view, that information is now going out to the Azure search service. That's being used
Interesting.
here. Yeah.
So that calls in that great governance conversation.
Yeah.
You need to really understand what you're putting in views, what you're putting in searches, and the impacts are usually greater than just what you're looking at right now.
Yeah, and for many organizations, this is going to be pretty safe, but when you start getting into companies that are dealing with medical records, companies that are dealing with sensitive, financial information and that type of thing, just make sure you go through the appropriate governance checks that you need to for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So getting into how you do this, what is actually involved. As I mentioned, there's an administrator has to turn it on for the entire organization, but that's actually the third step of all the things that you want to do. So I'm a little bit ahead of myself. The three steps at a high level are, the first one is to choose the entities that you want to include in relevance search. So you can say which entities either are in or out. Mm-hmm. The second thing you want to do is to choose the fields for each of those entities that you want to include in that search. And both of those two are, for those who have set up category search before, they're the same two steps that you would do there. So the only quote-unquote different step is enabling it for the entire organization to interact with Azure. So those first two steps, they can be done in any order, really, and anybody who can configure CRM can make the updates to those fields. And as far as blocking and tackling, where do you actually do this stuff? As far as turning on the relevance search, you do that through the general system settings under administration. So settings administration, go to system settings, you scroll down to an area that talks about search, and within there's a button to be able to choose which entities are in there. Now that entity list is going to show you all of the available entities within the Dynamics platform that are available. And it's a simple, two boxes on two different sides, add or remove, similar to adding in columns in other search types. Now at the bottom of the select entity screen, you're also going to find that there's a number at the bottom and a progress bar that shows at the bottom. And what that's counting toward is within Relevance Search, there is a maximum number of fields that you can synchronize out to that Azure search service. Okay. And you are limited for your entire CRM organization, only 1,000 total fields that will be indexed as part of Relevance Search.
Okay.
So 1,000 fields sounds like a lot. It can be a lot, but it can also feel restrictive if there are a lot of different record types that you want to have out there.
Yeah, is there a limit on how many entities you can include?
There's no limit on how many entities that you can have.
Oh, okay.
It's all based on the number of total fields that there are. So I suppose you couldn't have more than 1,000 entities out there because you can only have 1,000 fields. I don't know how useful that search would be, but hey.
If you're creating 1,000 entities, maybe you're over-engineering things.
Probably. Either that or you've got a lot of add-ons that you've put in.
Yeah.
But a couple of things. Not all fields count as one field toward that total. Okay. So I'm not going to go super technical on exactly why, but the lookup fields count as 3 fields each toward your total, just because of the way they're structured and how CRM has to send that information out. And option set fields count as 2 toward each of your total. So all of a sudden, if you have a lot of lookup fields that are going to be included, that starts to become, it consumes your 1,000 fields a lot more quickly.
I actually ran into that on a project recently where we ran out of fields on an entity. Because you hit that same limit. Now you have to really have an impressive amount of fields to get there, but we did get there. And the scoring system of how many fields you really get and how many, almost like points they're each worth is really interesting. So we'll throw that link down at the bottom of this episode in case anyone's a little nervous about how their fields are going to shake out. Both with kind of how that relates to Relevance Search and then just to entities in general. Yeah. Hopefully you don't hit it. It's not something I ever even had to think about until a couple months ago, but it can happen.
Yeah, and fortunately for this one, it's easy enough to go back in and take out fields that you're maybe aren't as important as they used to be or are a little less relevant, no pun intended, for the search that you have. One of the other things, just as a general best practice around when you're choosing search fields, if you have too many different fields that are being searched, all of a sudden your search can be a lot less effective because there's those false positive results that you're going to get that you then have to filter and pare down to be able to get to. So be reasonable about how many fields you're adding in the first place. Less is more. It's also going to help with performance of the search. The more fields that are being searched across, the slower it is to return those results. It's not crazy, but in a lot of times people want a very quick, snappy search coming back.
Yeah, and think about what your user is going to know off the top of their head, because that's what they're going to search with. So that really kind of depends on industry. Like I found in finance, account numbers or part of an account number is something that they would know really well. But in other industries, people don't have account numbers memorized or don't have them handy. So I found when people are searching, they either have another system up on their screen and they're trying to link the two up. Maybe they're looking at an outside database or a website. Addresses are really common. I find people want to search off of part of an address, part of a phone number. I have one client who uses part of a phone number all the time.
Yeah.
Names are really common, but you got to be careful about those false positives. How do you feel about people using big description boxes and big bodies of text in this kind of search?
So this one is going to be a little more forgiving on that than, say, category search had been. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, and we can dig into this in a little bit here, but the types of fields that are actually going to be searchable as far as what gets matched versus different ways that fields are used is a little bit different for relevance search. And in fact, only single line of text or multiple line of text fields, and then secretly look up fields behind that because that's one of the three, will be searchable as far as that text match for what people put in.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So things like, say, an option set field, if you have that included in the fields that you're using to search, it's not actually going to search through that and match on it.
Interesting. So it will let you select fields that it won't actually let you use?
Yeah, and here's the reason why, and there are a couple of reasons for this. One is, and I danced around this a little bit before, but when you set up category search, which is the other global search type in Dynamics, it uses the same mechanism for that search, where you have what are called the quick find views for each entity type. So the quick find views for that, when you open that up, you have the search columns that you have available in that. So when you're choosing your search columns, it's going to be that same way of choosing them for both category search as well as relevance search. So if you want it in one versus the other, say, when somebody is looking at a list of records, you need that quick search to be set up to include a certain field, even if it's not going to be searchable in relevance search. Okay. So there will be times when you have that in there. Now, the other aspect of it is that I'd mentioned that there are filters that you can apply to the results when you get it back. So you get your list of 100 records back, and then you can use things to go based on a time frame, or things based on who the owner is, or things based on various option sets. And all of those filter fields are ones where those need to be synchronized out to the database, or out to that Azure search service, so it knows how to use them to be able to filter the results. Okay. So you end up sending information, dates are a really good example there, where you're not going to be able to use relevance search on the date, but you need that to act as a good filter. So you can say, this record was dated, the close date on that opportunity was sometime in this time frame. So you won't search for it directly as a search term, but you will use it as a filter later, so you need to enable that field.
Okay, so you want to think about that in user training, because if someone's going to key in a date in their search bar, they might pull up, how if the date appears that way in the body of text somewhere, they're going to see it, but they're not going to see all of their results. Yep. So there's probably needs to be a little bit of training around how to search and
what and how. And fortunately, at least in my experience, I haven't seen a lot of people who go into the global search bar and just search on a date, because there's too much potential for
definitely
it could bring back conceivably a lot of irrelevant information. It's less about give me everything that happened on this date, and usually around some other type of field or search criteria. But your point around kind of the training for that, and how and why and what that difference is an important one. And along those same lines, when you're thinking about that training, by default, the relevance search is going to give you only up to 4 fields as far as what those various filters are going to be. Now, you might wonder to yourself, well, what determines what those fields are? Well, when an admin sets up relevance search, or sets up the quick find views, the first 4 fields in the view for the quick find, the fields that are listed out in that view setup, are going to be the default 4 that are used for any of that filter criteria.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and as end users, you can actually change for yourself what those are going to be. So you're not stuck with those first 4 columns as the filter criteria. You can change those. But that's one of those things during training, probably a little bit, like a second or third training, helping people change those so they can filter based on the relevant fields. And as an example there, opportunities are a good example where you may have several dates that are on there, and you may want to filter based on, say, an estimated close date. But if the estimated close date isn't one of the first 4 fields in your quick find view, that's not going to be a default filter that's out there for users. So that will be a little bit of a setup piece that has to happen.
Something that they'll need to add.
Yeah, and that also goes into, well, how should you set up views? Maybe that's a reason to have the close date as one of those first 4 fields. And similar, and this is true in both relevance search as well as category search, for the when you're looking at the list of records that are in the results, you see the name of the record as the first line, and then you see the next available 4 fields from that view. So if, say, estimated close date is an important thing that people are going to want there's kind of this push-pull between what those first 4 fields are being used for, and there's even this additional level of importance that goes on kind of figuring that out and listening, and then training people, okay, if you don't care about those, here's how you can change what your filters and sliders are going to look like.
I think that's important definitely for organizations that have multiple departments who use records differently. We see it all the time where sales cares about entirely different fields on the account than maybe a customer service rep would, or marketing. And so, in that case, do you do the best you can for the whole organization and then you teach individual departments how to configure it? Can a power user share that configuration with others, or does each user have to set it up?
That configuration is per user, and it's not shareable.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I haven't actually dug into it. Maybe somebody will add something into the XRM toolbox to be able to set some of that type of personal option. But today it is a manual step for people, and as such, I suspect most people aren't going to end up wanting or caring how they change it. They'll just kind of live with whatever those standard 4 fields are going to be.
Yeah, probably. You'll get a couple of power users who will tinker and other people will leave it. Yep. I think it's really important from a user adoption standpoint to tinker until you've got the search actually bringing relevant results.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes these kinds of tools can hurt user adoption if you don't implement them right, because a user pulls it up, they're not seeing everything they know should be there, and that is their proof that CRM doesn't solve their problem, doesn't work, and therefore they don't have to use it. And so I've found in some things like this in the past when I'm working with user adoption issues, you have to really be confident in it before you roll it out, and then be prepared to tinker as you go. Yep. And if someone says, well, yeah, I tried to pull it and I can't even find my biggest client in there, so it doesn't work, I'm not going to use CRM. You have to really have a responsive, kind of proactive approach to it to making sure you resolve that. Otherwise, that chatter can really hurt, not on a technical side, but just on a user perception of how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as, kind of continuing through this process here, as far as configuration, those are the biggest parts of it, is choosing the entities and then choosing the fields that you're going to have within those quick find views. Once those are set up, the third step is having that administrator enable it. You can do that ahead of time, but that is one of those things where it will start pushing data as soon as it's enabled. So if you're going to have to update those quick find views to be able to have the relevant things going, better to do that first. It'll just save some of the overhead and chance for issues. Okay. To that point, because this is synchronizing with an Azure Search service, it will take a good hour at least to be able to make it so Relevance Search starts returning any results for you. It needs to synchronize that information out there and index it and so forth. So this is definitely one where you will not see immediate results, and as records change within Dynamics, there can be a bit of a lag before it shows up inside of that Azure Search
Oh, okay. Interesting. Is there anything else that I can see in the Relevance Search other than CRM records?
At this point, it is restricted to CRM records as far as what shows up in there. There is there are a couple of cool features around it where, let's say that you search for a particular contact in CRM, you find a list of contacts. There's a checkbox option to be able to give you like activities associated to those contacts once you've kind of filtered down to a specific set. So you can do some things that, while it's still data inside of CRM, there's a little more intelligence around that.
Okay.
If you think of category search, you search for Michael Brown, but you really want to get activities with Michael Brown, but you kind of just have to go on his name and you get a long list of activities for all the Michael Browns. Well, you can use some of the filtering capability in Relevance Search to really dig into really more of that result set that you're looking for.
Oh, okay, and get the right one and then drill from there.
Yeah.
Nice.
So with that, I think that covers kind of the basic building blocks of getting started with Relevance Search. Do you think there's anything else that is kind of hanging out there that you're curious about?
So who can't use it right now?
So this is an online-only feature. Okay. So if you are Dynamics 365 online, any flavor, you can use this.
Okay, got it. If you're on-prem, even really, really recent, still out of luck.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think that's just becoming a theme in so many ways. There's so many cool things now we can do with Azure, and pretty consistently we're seeing you just have to be online to get that.
Yeah, in fact, I stumbled across recently, and we can include this link in the show notes as well, but Microsoft actually has a formal list now of their online-only offerings for Dynamics 365. Wow. So in the past, I haven't found it to be published or quite that available, but here you're able to see kind of specifically what that is, which is really helpful from a planning standpoint to know what is available. And it kind of gives, is it in preview, is it fully released, and is it online only? Yeah.
Let's throw that link down at the bottom too.
Yep. Perfect.
For people to have. Cool. Well, thanks, Matt. That's
Absolutely.
Really helpful.
Well, until the next time.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rekstad and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.